Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Kirstin Ferguson is an award-winning author of 3 books, a weekly columnist for the Sydney Morning Herald, and has been named as one of the top 50 management thinkers in the world today, including being the recipient of the Thinkers 50 Distinguished Leadership Award. Kirsten brings decades of leadership experience across a variety of sectors, public, private, military and media, combined with deep academic expertise, including a PhD in leadership and culture. She's built a loyal following for her practical wisdom on work, leadership and life, and is a professor at Queensland University of Technology Business School. Before we hear from Kirsten, I want you to do one thing, and that's follow, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen, as it really does make a difference to the podcast ratings. And leave a review. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you as always. Welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, Kirsten.
Fantastic to be here.
I've given a bit of an introduction to you, but it'd be great to start today's discussion if you could just give a bit of background to your career, your journey to becoming one of the top management thinkers in the world today, and maybe some background on the books as well.
Yeah, look, I am a walking billboard for the fact that you do not have to have a linear career path. I mean, I started my career in the Air Force. I was a young Air Force officer, joined when I was 17, went to our academy, graduated, ended up at a fighter squadron. While I was studying law, went off to law firms, then ended up becoming CEO of a consulting firm before I jumped onto company boards at a very young age, about 35, my first corporate board, and 38, my first listed board. So sat on company boards as a professional director for about 15 years. In amongst that, I went and did a PhD in leadership and culture because it's something I've always been interested in. And I wrote my first book because I started a social media campaign that ended up becoming this sort of viral sensation around the world called Celebrating Women. And that led to my first book, which then gave me the taste to do more. And my last book was called Head and Heart, The Art of Modern Leadership. And thankfully, that introduced me to the Thinkers 50 community. I was very fortunate, and I can't speak highly enough about that community to be recognised with their leadership award and then ranked as one of their top 50 thinkers. And now I've got my new book, Blindspotting, coming out. So my career has been all over the place, but I am so grateful for it because I think at every single stage I've carried with me tools as a leader myself. And then having studied leadership to really see that challenge we sometimes get between theory and practice. Like being a leader is bloody hard. So it's all very well that the theory says this, but when we're living it day to day, it's, much more difficult. And so in all my work and speaking and research now, I try to really remember how difficult it is, and then try and bring that research to life through the real world.
Well, I mean, you definitely do that in the books. I've read 2 of your books, and I suppose that eclectic background that you've just described there really does fuel your writing as well. I mean, I think, I previously spoke to you on my old podcast when you just launched Head and Heart, The Art of Modern Leadership. And I love that book. In fact, you can see it on the YouTube channel on the shelf behind me. I'd like to just start at that, actually. If you could give our listeners a quick overview of Head and Heart. And also, because it does relate to the new book as well, Blindspotting, doesn't it?
It does. And the 2 are really companion books. Head and Heart's the foundation, though. So this was really from this idea that I've read lots of leadership books, as everyone listening probably has, and sometimes they'll focus in on one idea, vulnerability or something like that. And I always would read that thinking, yeah, that's great, but how do I apply it when I'm like the CFO or I'm doing something really difficult? And so I've always been someone myself, I think, who's just as focused on being capable in a job and having the technical expertise and really wanting to excel at the side of the job I've learned through university and, all of those sort of technical things, as well as being someone who's emotionally intelligent and understanding that side of leadership and why it's so important. And, that first question you asked me about my career, it's made me reflect that during my career, I came through the military, I was then in law firms. These are very head-based workplaces. I then went and led an international firm of psychologists, very heart-based. And I think the two experiences in that period of my executive career really helped shape my understanding of leadership, because I learnt with the psychologists what worked at the law firms and military certainly didn't work, and vice versa. And so you really need to be able to understand what is needed and when, which brings me to head and heart. All that really is about is understanding when we need to really lean into those skills like curiosity and capability and wisdom, how we weigh up risk and reward and reading the room. And likewise, when we lean into intellectual humility and empathy, courage to speak up for what we believe in, self-awareness. And at any point in time, we're going to need both. It's not a binary, I'm going to be just this. Obviously, it's not that simple. But it is this awareness that we need all of it to be a well-rounded modern leader today. And you can't get away from the fact we're all leaders in our families, in our roles, and in our communities. And so I think the most effective leaders are those that lead with their head and their heart.
Yeah. And I think that's what, again, most people that are listening to this podcast are from a business background. But, I think, we are all leaders, aren't we? Whether it's in our families, our communities, or our workplaces. And those learnings from the books do translate into both our working and our family lives, which I definitely, it resonated with me anyway.
But for those formal leaders listening, what I don't think we do well is remind the people that we are leading, that they too are leaders, because I think leadership is simply a series of moments, and every moment offers us this opportunity for impact, positive impact. And we need to be reminding the people that we lead that they are leaders as well. They might not be formal leaders, capital L in the org chart, but they are certainly having those leadership moments of impact every day in their roles, in their communities, and in their families.
Yeah. So I've had the pleasure of seeing an early digital copy of your new book, and we're recording this early, but this podcast released, and in fact, it will have already come out on the 3rd of June globally. So, but for those listeners who won't have got a copy, can you describe exactly what Blindspotting is about?
Yeah, it's called Blindspotting: How to See What Others Miss. And it really builds on the work we were just talking about in Head and Heart. In something like 32,000 people now have done what I call the Head and Heart Leader Scale, built that for the book. And anyone listening, just go to headheartleader.com. And every time we do the data analysis on that, on those submissions, one of the most interesting attributes of head and heart leadership that came through is this idea of perspective, or being able to read a room. And for me, reading the room, I wanted to understand more about what that looked like. And it related very closely to intellectual humility and, of course, then curiosity, which is the other one that everyone comes through as always self-assessing as the one they value the most, which is not surprising. So Blindspotting sort of pulls those three together into looking at the idea or the theory of intellectual humility, intellectual curiosity, and cognitive flexibility. Now, that's the last time you're going to hear me using those kinds of words, because for me, they just are simply to be honest, to be curious, and to be flexible. And what Blindspotting is all about is a very practical way that we can actually use all three together to overcome the flaws we have in our thinking. And we all have them. So anyone listening that thinks this doesn't apply to them, that is your first thinking flaw, because we've all got them. And what I wanted to sort of understand was, I know that being curious, of course, is a valuable leadership attribute. No one's going to argue with that. But on its own, it's limited. So if you're just curious and then do nothing with it, you're not prepared to change your mind, you're not prepared to have an open mind, you're not prepared to be honest that actually you've just discovered a better outcome than the one you've been telling everyone you think is best, then what's it for? And similarly, for being honest about our limitations, our understanding and our knowledge, it's all very well for me to understand myself that I don't know everything, but unless I'm then curious to find out and flexible to change my mind, what good is it? So the magic of Blindspotting is using all three of those ideas together. And what it helps us do is build not only leaders like ourselves who are looking for things that we otherwise absolutely would have missed, we're able to then build blind spotting cultures where everyone is on this path of really seeking to find what otherwise they wouldn't see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's, as a previous leader of a company, setting up from scratch to build with over 100 employees globally, I think what really resonated with me is this being aware that you don't have all the answers, and you do have. It's okay to say I don't know, or as you say in the book, it's more accurate to say I don't know just yet, but I will find out because I'll be curious, I'll be open minded, I'll be flexible with my thinking.
Yeah.
And
And
it,
it's those
and
4 words, not 3. I don't know yet. It's the
yeah,
yet that's the powerful word, because we're then reassuring ourselves and others that, I might not know right now. And they can tell, by the way, everyone's bullshit meters are very well tuned. I don't know. Certainly Australians' bullshit meters, they're off the charts. So you're only trying to fool yourself, and you think you're fooling others, but you're not. And there's a lot of fear, I think, in being able to say, I don't know something, fear that we'll lose credibility. Whereas, in fact, it's the reverse. We'll talk, I'm sure, about choosing the right moments, but generally speaking, you will build trust if you're able to say, I don't know yet. Sorry,
yeah.
I jumped in because I got a bit excited on our 4 words.
No, well, and they're important to emphasise, aren't they? Well, that leads me nicely on actually, because I was going to say, when we're thinking in business, many leaders really do, in those high pressure environments, quick decisions, critical, conditions, might fear the saying "I don't know," and seeing it as a weakness of uncertainty, maybe. But blind spotting doesn't definitely not mean you should avoid making those bold decisions or having strong convictions, does it?
No, not at all. Like, definitely read the room. So, if you're a surgeon and you're taking out my appendix, I don't really want to hear that you don't know how to do it, and you'll figure that out along the way. Or if you're a QC or a KC now standing in front of a judge defending my life, I don't really want to hear, hey, look, I don't know yet, but let's brainstorm that. So, you've got to pick your moments. But let's just talk generally. For most of us leading others in situations that are not life and death and we're not in a crisis, it's generally going to be a much better solution to try and build innovation, collaboration. You're role modeling to others that it's okay to say they don't know. And I don't know a leader that doesn't want their staff to come and tell them they don't know something when they don't know. Far better than to carry on and just hear 6 months down the track that they've wasted 6 months because they didn't want to tell you. So it's really making this, or building on the idea of psychological safety, role modeling what that means, and then not abandoning all responsibility. This isn't about like throwing up your arms and going, well, I don't know, you guys work it out. Not at all. This is leaning into, this is a really unique challenge. And look, it's not one I've seen before. I would love to talk to you guys about how we're going to do it together. Nick, you've got really strong skills in A. Tom over there's got them in C. Sally, together we've got this nailed. But right now, I don't really know what the outcome is. And I think that is a way of truly leading in a time that is so ambiguous as we're living in. We don't know where things are going. We don't know how AI is going to affect our industries. We don't know what is going to happen to the world economy. Like, we literally don't know. So being okay with that is a really powerful way of engaging with those we lead.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm a career researcher, and I've been into many rooms, whether it's from branding, market assessment, but a lot of the time customer loyalty studies, things like that. But you'd hope, wouldn't you, if someone's commissioned an agency to say how satisfied their customers are, that they'd be open-minded. But I can tell you now, I've had some clients where they've, the first sign of contradiction, they weren't ready to revise their old way of thinking.
Yeah.
And new information that was coming to light, they were saying, hold on a minute, that can't be right, even though that's the voice of the customer. So I've seen it firsthand many a time.
And this is where we all have to disentangle our ego. So in that case, you might have someone who is invested in their product being the best product. And in their mind, people have been telling them it's great for 20 years. So who are you to tell me that that's now different? Their whole sense of self is caught up in being right. And, the idea that perhaps they've missed the boat on something or whatever. It's just too difficult to contemplate. Now, it's easy for us to see that in other people, but it happens to us all the time as well. It might not be as obvious as that, but if we're people who define ourselves by our work, by what we need to know, by being an expert in something, it's much harder to accept this idea that we don't know everything. There's this wonderful curse of expertise that I write about in the book. And, everyone has probably heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is, people who don't know anything tend to overestimate what they do know. Well, those of us who are experts suffer from the opposite of that, which is we're very good at knowing what we know, having that sureness of what we know, but we're not good at having doubt. So that means we're incredibly confident about what we know, but we're not prepared to question what it is we know. Now, that's dangerous in and of itself, because we have this idea that because I'm an expert, because I've been doing this for 20 years, because I've seen this problem 30 times before, because no one can teach me anything. And we've all worked for leaders like that as well. And if you're like going, mate, the world has changed since you last were on the tools, but, okay. And they just can't get their head around it. So I think that's something we're all susceptible to.
No, absolutely. We can all think back to some of those kind of leaders, can't we, in our careers. Blindspotting rests, as you say, on these three key mindsets, and they are practical tools that help us navigate, the complexities that is leadership that we're talking about here, but also decision making, this collaboration. And I think each one deserves a deep dive. So, can we start with be honest? What's that about?
So be honest is a bit of what we've sort of jumped into already. As I said, it's all around this idea of intellectual honesty. And one of the reasons I've chosen Be Honest is NVIDIA, the company that everyone would have heard of, is one of it's the only company I could find that has had intellectual honesty as a company value since day dot. And in the book, I open with a story about how they almost did not survive, the mid-90s, where intellectual honesty was really needed and helped them turn around a pretty serious situation with their graphics cards. And, of course, intellectual honesty has then, in multiple occasions now, led them to be the absolute monolithic AI chip builder, of the world now. But being honest, there's three practices that come within that. The first is accepting our intellectual limits, which we've sort of touched on. And this isn't being so crippled by thinking you don't know anything that you can barely get out of bed. And it's also not at the other extreme, being so intellectually arrogant that you think you know everything. Blindspotting and being honest is that sweet spot in the middle of acknowledging that you don't know everything, but being confident that you can find the answers. So it's really important to know it's not either of those extremes. It's definitely a confidence, a sort of an intellectual confidence. The second practice within being honest is about disentangling our ego, which we talked about, this idea that we really need to separate what we know from who we are. And that's trickier than it sounds, especially if you're an overachiever that's done lots of degrees. I'm now just sort of putting this out to myself because I suffer from this, where you've always been rewarded and acknowledged for everything you know and how well you do things, and it becomes your definition of who you are. And who am I without that? I remember when I first moved from being a CEO to sitting on company boards, my sense of self was tied up in saying, hi, I'm Kirstin Ferguson, I'm the CEO of whatever. As soon as I couldn't do that, I remember being a little lost for a while, like, well, who am I and what do I do? Now, ultimately, that's because my ego was completely tied up in that title and that sense of being able to say, this is what I do, so this is who I am. That's not how we're best to operate, because the fact is, those things change, we all change, and I am someone quite different. So disentangling our ego is really important. And the third is hunting for our biases. And we've all got them. We all know we've got them. Do we actually go hunting for them? No, not necessarily. We might have them pointed out to us in a pretty uncomfortable conversation, but we're not actively hunting for them. And like biases, of course, can be the obvious ones around biases against age and ethnicity and sexuality, but also much more around those thinking biases of confirmation bias, only looking for things that we know are going to suit our argument. We've all done that, I can assure you. We all do that every day. So that's what being honest is all about. And it's really those three practices. And in the book, I talk about how we can do them ourselves and then how we can get others to be doing them as well, because I think building cultures of blind spotting is really important. The second mindset is be curious. And the three practices of that are searching for the truth. And this is the objective truth in a world of fake truth, fake news, my truth, your truth. Everyone's got their version of events. There is an objective truth. And I think as leaders, we need to come back to that center and really search for that, like a good investigative journalist tries to do. Pursuing different perspectives, which is really about making sure we're hearing from very different voices, so it's not just our own little bubble. And then questioning for insight. So rather than using questions to win, we're actually just using questions to learn. And again, all of us have fallen into that trap of having a position we really want to see come through and asking questions to put someone in a corner, because you know that if you ask enough questions, you're going to prove yourself right. This is the opposite of that. This is genuinely wanting to just learn. And finally, the mindset of being flexible is all about reading the room, which I've talked about a bit already, and being prepared to go into any room, or obviously your industry, it can be anything, but having an open mind as to what you might learn. Second is embracing ambiguity. We work in an ambiguous world. We need to embrace it. You can only do that if you're prepared to understand that things change and that, our minds change and what we know changes. And then very lastly, it's keeping your mind open. And as you said at the beginning, that doesn't mean flip-flopping. This isn't about someone comes and tells me that the world is now flat and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I've now read all the flat earthers' views. I've changed my mind. Like, that's not blind spotting. And it's also not me changing my mind on values I hold dear, on marriage equality, for example. I would never change my mind on that. I am fixed. But there are some things like working from home where I have been a real zealot, like everyone should be able to work from home. Every company that isn't offering it is, backwards. And then I listen to younger workers. I listen to my daughters who are in their 20s who like going into the office. I'm like, okay, I've actually got to rethink what I thought I knew about this, because I came from it from a very different place and bias than others. And so I have kept my convictions, I've held my convictions quite lightly on that one now. So that is, in a sort of nutshell, a deep dive into the three mindsets and all the practices of blind spotting.
B2B Frameworks is a curated collection of proven business frameworks to develop your strategic thinking skills, solve your biggest business problems, and unlock your next promotion. Our mission is to help you achieve these goals. We want to create the next generation of successful business leaders by providing the tools and frameworks needed to create effective strategies that drive business growth. Each framework comes with a downloadable set of instructions with large, colourful diagrams and editable templates to guide you through the process step by step and prompt you to consider the problem from every possible angle. Along with audio guides and educational tools, our extensive content library is full of real-world examples and case studies of strategic thinking in action. So why learn with B2B Frameworks? We've carefully curated only the most effective, proven business and marketing frameworks. Our downloadable materials and audio guides will help you easily apply each framework. And the insights and advice you'll find across the site are based on 30 years of consulting experience from one of the world's leading business strategy experts, Paul Haig. B2B Frameworks is a small investment to advance your career or grow your business. Start your journey to becoming a successful business leader by joining B2B Frameworks today. Yeah, and as As I was reading the book, those three mindsets they came through so strongly because in my past life, when I was hiring new research execs, it was a market research agency I used to run. I was always looking for curiosity because that helps sharpen perspective. It challenges to go beyond the obvious, and that's what we're doing all the time with research, trying to understand the full picture. But that honesty tied with flexibility as well. It really did. Those were three big qualities I was always looking for when looking to recruit. So it really did make an impact. This book, as I was reading through it.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that because I would have done the same as you. Like I'm looking for curiosity but I don't know that I'd ever thought about why beyond the surface level because I think curiosity is important. But really, it's not valuable without these other aspects
Yeah.
because otherwise people just waste time going down rabbit holes with nothing to show for it.
Mindless questioning. Yes.
Yeah. I'm very good at going down rabbit holes of no particular value, by the way. But we really want people to be able to, learn something from that and do something with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've already said like this magic of blind spotting happens when the synergy of these three comes together, and we can unlock this awareness or insight that empowers us and our teams to make better decisions to create that change. And you've used one example already, but there's numerous examples in the book of how leaders have used blind spotting, become more effective. Do you have a favorite example of how an individual embraced blind spotting and then the difference it made to the company they work for?
Oh, well, the diversity of leaders in the book reflects my own leadership diversity because it's like from the president of CBS News through to a fighter pilot I served with. There's the head of a massive accounting company. There's a real range of people. But I think one of the stories I liked was from a guy called Marcus Collins, an American marketing professor. And he worked for Beyonce back in the day and ran her social media. And this is in 2012 from memory. And they hadn't really had much success on Facebook. I think it was Facebook that they were wanting to get started on. It might have been whichever one. And so, she's obviously a huge star, but the work that he and his team were doing was just not having the impact that you would expect from such a big star. And their massive blind spot was that they hadn't sort of realized or engaged with this following of Beyonce's called the Beehive, which I've learned lots about now. And the Beehive basically had their entire social media campaign going on independent of Beyonce and her team. So her team are over here trying to put out, posts and things. And virtually the Beehive was saying, you guys are embarrassing. Like this is not us or her fan base. And so they then ended up, the social media team engaged with the Beehive. And when she released her self-titled album, I think it was the first one ever to just be released and dropped overnight on social media. It wasn't done through radios and, playing songs and things. And it was an enormous success. And so I loved Marcus talking about his blind spot in going into that and then having to unlearn and pivot, which is the key to blind spotting. The leaders that are most valuable now are not the ones that have all the knowledge and hold on to it and think that what they learned 30 years ago, it's still driving what they do now. It's the leaders that can say, like in your briefing, you were talking about, wow, I really need to unlearn everything I thought I knew about my product and start moving towards where the customers are telling me that I've got to go. Yeah. Way more valuable than someone who is so defensively putting up a wall around what they believe they've always known.
Yeah. You mentioned it already, but we do live in this world of complexity, ambiguity, disruption, where it seems to be the norm these days, and the pressures with AI. Does that mean that blind spotting is more important than ever, do you think?
Well, thank you for that, Dorothy Dixer. But yes, I think you could be right. Look, I suspect it's always been important, but whether or not, we've always known this stuff. This is not a book about making rockets. I'm not a scientist. It's bringing it all together and hopefully for us, finding practical ways we can exercise this muscle every day. And it is a muscle that you get used to doing. The first time you go and tell your team, look, I don't know yet, it's going to be uncomfortable. The 10th time, they're probably going to be laughing at you going, mate, what do you know? But it's going to be easier. And so I do think we are in a place where even if we haven't acknowledged it to others, laying in bed at night when you're terrified about how you're actually going to do this project you've just been given, you know you don't know. So you know that there's a whole heap of blind spotting you've got to do, and this is hopefully going to help you through that.
Well, that's a question I had and was going to follow up actually in terms of how do you know what you don't know?
You don't, but you'll get closer to knowing what you don't know by admitting you know there's things you don't know and asking other people. This is why we need to say to our team, look, I don't know how we're going to best do this. I've got some ideas from my past experience, but I don't know everything. And Nick, you're way closer to AI than I am. And, Tom and Sally, you guys are much closer to the client. I don't know everything. So how together are we going to do that? I will only learn what I don't know by listening, and then by using those questions for insight, using open questions, open-ended questions, so that I'm genuinely curious to find out what the answer is. And then that will build my knowledge that'll help me have one less unknown for next time. But we'll never have a list with none of them, unfortunately.
Yeah. So in your book, you identify that there's seekers. And there's knowers, and when to lean into being one over another, and this is key in terms of leadership, problem solving, and growth. So, can you talk to me about these two very different archetypes and the different mindsets that they have?
Yeah, and look, I'm going to be talking at extremes because it's easier to explain, but all of us are somewhere in the spectrum at any one point in time. None of us are always seeking and none of us are always knowing. But seekers are those people who basically embody what we've been talking about. And I can think of people like Daniel Kahneman and other Nobel Prize winners who you think know everything there is to know about their area. They've just won a Nobel Prize for, and yet they tend to be the most humble. They'll say, look, I don't know how to do that. And gosh, you've asked a really amazing question. What do you think? Because I haven't thought that through before.
Yeah.
That they are seekers, and we know them, we work with them, and they'll come in and they'll make you feel that your solution is incredibly important. So we know it when we see it. We also know the knowers. The knowers come into a room, they don't bother asking questions because they already know the answers. And if you've got a question, they're going to quickly tell you what the answer is. And we all just go, well, why bother? We know that they're going to do whatever they want to do anyway. And those people can really shut down that collaboration. Now, there are times, though, when we need knowers. So there are times where you're in a crisis where you need a very clear solution to something, where the knowers in your team are going to be fabulously valuable. They're the ones you want to go to and go, okay, here's our engineering problem, John. What do you think we need to do? And he may just say, this is what we have to do. We might need to moderate that and go, yeah, well, that's interesting because Elizabeth over here's got a very different idea. What's your thought on that? So as leaders, we're still massaging our knowers, but it's not as though they're wrong, but if they're unable to temper it at times to be a seeker, that can become a problem. And that's where we need to coach knowers to help understand why being a seeker is going to be valuable for the team as well. But as a general rule, all of us as leaders should really lean into being seekers. And even when there's issues and problems, as I said before, that you've done 30 times, be a seeker, because you can use questions to use this as an opportunity, like a teachable moment doctors talk about. Use it as a teachable moment, ask great questions. You don't have to say the answer. We can be humble enough to not need to prove that we already know everything. So use it as a way to question others so that they can feel they've come to that solution themselves, or perhaps a completely different one you hadn't even thought of.
Yeah, I mean, when I think back to my old company, maybe we were an anomaly. in the fact that we were researchers, so we were maybe more curious than ever. We were more seekers, but I think as a leader, I was quite open that I didn't have all the answers. But
Yeah.
we built this culture within the leadership team as well to being challenged. We had this view: the more ideas, the better, as it allowed input, to evolve and to shape the future. And what we valued more than anything is that people cared about having an opinion about the company and being able to
Exactly.
have their ideas heard. And it's okay, isn't it, to challenge the status quo if you're looking to do it in a constructive manner.
You were an anomaly. So, certainly when I was leading a group of psychologists, very much they're about seeking, and, scientists, that's their whole bread and butter. That's what they want to do. But I mentioned I'd spent 15 years on company boards, property boards, construction boards, all sorts of different, very traditional industries. And knowing is the bread and butter there, having that confidence to say, I know what to do. I know how we're going to do it right now. Yeah. And, that's the culture, but that comes at a price that others perhaps might not feel able to disrupt the status quo, to say, well, what if we did do it differently? Like, what if you're wrong? And so I think the majority of the time we're rewarding people for knowing. That's kind of how we set up our whole reward and recognition program. But we also want people who are brilliant leaders. So I think it's important to recognize that those of us who can set the cultures of organizations really need to be mindful about what we're rewarding and to be focusing on those leaders who can do both. So this is where it came. I said at the very beginning, you have to be able to read a room. In a crisis, there has been times in my life as a leader, I have absolutely gone into the knowing space because it was expected in that situation that I knew what I was doing and that I led from the front and that I was demonstrating confidence and strength and belief. And that is what is needed then and there. But 90% of the time, that's not the case. And you have to be able to flip between them.
Yeah, yeah. We talked a lot today about individuals, and in particular, we just talked about seekers and how this blind spotting can create this competitive advantage. So, transforming these blind spots leads to growth. Is there a way to embed or cultivate this type of mindset across a whole organization?
Yeah, and I've really, different to my last book, Head and Heart, where I didn't really talk about workplace culture at all. This book I definitely have, and the last third is about how we can do that. Because I think you can recruit seekers. There's ways we can be asking great questions in interviews about everything we've spoken about. And, not only what do you do to sort of sate your curiosity and things or try and test that, but tell me the last time you've had to change your mind on something at work. What prompted that and how did it feel for you? What sort of drove that? And the same with intellectual honesty. Tell me about something you don't know much about. How does that feel? It's more trying to assess all three of those. The head of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, the CEO, says that when he's interviewing, because he's obviously got intellectual honesty as one of his values, he'll ask the interviewee to teach him something, so he's sort of trying to understand how easily they can talk technical words and teach it anyway. But then he'll challenge them and he'll say, but, I don't think that's right or whatever. And that's his way of testing for seekers. How open are they to feedback? How open are they to adjusting their position on something, disentangling their ego in those moments? So I think you can definitely recruit for seekers. I also think there's a lot of ways that all of those practices we talked about, we can encourage in teams of seekers. So really be role modeling as leaders, being able to admit what we don't know, being absolutely fine with someone else saying they don't know, going, thanks for that. That's really helpful because now we can do X, Y, and Z, or we can get this person to work with you. Understanding how we can all look for our biases, finding ways other people can help us with that, having a little bit of a buddy that goes, dude, man, the confirmation bias that you just did, because we don't see it. We just don't see it. But if we've got an environment where we can call it out in a fun way, I think that helps.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and I think what's interesting was, when we were pitching to sell my previous agency to Dentsu, they said one of the key reasons they were interested in us was because we'd fostered this diversity in our leadership team. I mean, obviously we created a brand, we were creating good profit, but they said that the fact that we had this diverse leadership team, they really liked it, fed into their values, and I know, as we grew and made decisions, when we brought different genders, different backgrounds into the mix, it made for a more varied perspective, of course, but it definitely made for better decision making all around. And it was so crucial. When it guided us through COVID, we've been through various different recessions as we grew, and just having those different perspectives to bounce ideas off, it really did help.
Like it's so obvious, and that makes me disheartened when I look what's happening in some parts of the world where there's trying to unravel D&I programs, and it's anyone who has experienced the true beauty of diverse teams would know that this isn't just some woke made up thing. It's actually tangible in the outcomes that we get.
Yeah. So, as with your last book, the ideas you put forward, they're definitely not abstract, Kirsten. It's very practical. Even in this book, you even have questions to say in certain situations. We're not trying to make people into robots, but it helps in those.
Yeah.
But you did with the head and heart, you've created this self-assessment tool. It includes these 26 questions, which actually, as you were speaking before, I thought people can use those when they're recruiting, because they
Absolutely.
that could definitely show. But I've taken the test to find out my strengths on where I need to focus effort in the future. As I've mentioned a couple of times already, I'm a career market researcher, so I thought I'd definitely be more curious than anything else. But it turns out I'm wrong, and my superpower is being flexible and especially reading the room. So that was very interesting. So,
but also very important for the work that you do, and it's not that you're not curious, it's just that relative, and obviously it's a self-assessment, so it could be different when you do it another time. But yeah, I'd encourage anyone listening, go to blindspotting.com.au. You have to go to the .au. I couldn't get blindspotting.com, Nick. I was very frustrated. But blindspotting.com.au, and it's free. Share it around, and you'll get a personalised sort of result.
I'm curious, where do most people's strengths and weaknesses fit within the three particular mindsets?
Well, Nick, I don't know yet, because we've done a pilot study, so I know from the pilot study results, but I'm going to be intellectually honest with you. I don't know, because I know Head and Heart's data so well, because we've had tens of thousands of people do it, but this is brand new. So I'm going to answer that in a little while. Let me have a bit more data. I would hate to make something up.
I think that's good then. So there's a call to action for all you listeners. I strongly
get onto it.
Go and take the test. Who doesn't want a free personalised report where
everyone loves a free test here.
Okay, so to conclude, I'm going to finish with my usual questions, and as always, normally kicking off with a question from my last guest. So Dan McCarthy, he's an associate professor of marketing at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. Now, this is a tough question, so you might need some intellectual honesty on this one, Kirsten. But he specialises in valuing firms by assessing the value of their customers and looking into the future. But he asks, with Kirsten's new book and how to see what other people miss, how predictable does Kirsten believe that customer behaviour is if you looked at it from a 5+ year horizon?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea, and I'm not sure I'll ever know. So that's my intellectual, honest answer. Like, that is not my area of expertise. So I don't know, but people are never predictable. So I'm going to guess not very is my guess.
Well, Dan's an expert in this, and he looks at...
That's a tough question.
That is a tough question, and I thought that when he was posing it. But anyway, I had to ask it.
That's all right. I have answered in a blind spotting way. I've got no idea.
Well, okay, here's a couple of questions from listeners then. So firstly, from Shahana Akhtar in Bangladesh, who asks, Kirsten's work on modern leadership is incredibly impactful. I'd love to know what are the most common blind spots leaders face today and how they can begin to recognise and address them before damage is done.
Oh, that's such a good question. I reckon this is an I reckon because I haven't got the data to back this up, but my experience has been that leaders, that curse of expertise I spoke about, the biggest blind spot is we work and work and work and we get deep into an area and we think we know as much as we need to know. And I think that closes us off. This also applies to really difficult topics. So the world is a lot more polarized than ever. And there's this tendency of people to have an opinion and then to prove they're right, not to disprove themselves, and as scientists will do, they'll say, I've got a hypothesis that the world is flat, but let me go and research to find out if I'm wrong. And lo and behold, science will show that you are wrong. Whereas I think the most common thing we're seeing now are people are not prepared to do that. This is my view and I am holding firm to it. And that applies whether it's a difficult issue on contentious, political matters or whatever, or it's something at work that we've worked on and we're very invested in. So that's what I think is the biggest blind spot.
Yeah. And secondly, I've got from George Green in Melbourne, back in Australia where you're based. What signs should leaders look for to understand if their efforts to address blind spots are being effective or whether they need adjustment?
That's a very good question. I think if you are continually in a meeting where I talk about this thing called the word to wisdom ratio, and that's basically how many words it's taking you to add any wisdom. But when we're a leader, we want to reverse it. So if you're in a meeting and you're doing all the talking and no one else is saying much, your word to wisdom ratio is out. That is also a sign that blind spotting is not working, because you want others to be coming up with ideas. You want others to be calling out, that you've missed something, or that, you're using old thinking around an idea that's changed. So I think if you're a leader that asks in a meeting, so has anyone else got anything to say, and there's dead silence, that is, to me, a flag that you would want to go and investigate what's going on.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
We definitely have.
Something's going on, and it's an orange flag, and you want to get to it before it becomes a red one very soon.
Yeah. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Say yes to opportunities. Even if you don't think you're ready, say yes. You never know where it'll go.
Yeah, I love that. Jump at every opportunity. And who would you like me to reach out to invite to come on the podcast in the future?
Oh, there's a Danish philosopher who's also involved with Thinkers 50 called Pia Lauritsen, and she's written a book on questions. All she writes about is questions, how we can think about questions, how we can use questions, how we can do better at our questioning. And I think you'd find her fascinating.
Well, do you know what? I already have, because she was one of my early guests here. She was the third or fourth guest I had on the show. So I'm glad that you said that.
All right. Well, she was one on my list. We'll have to think about the next person, but maybe Amy Gallo out of Boston, again, wrote a really great book that How to Get Along with People or something like that. Anyway, there's lots of
Amy hasn't been on the show.
Oh, thank God. Okay. But I'm glad you had Pia. She's fantastic.
Yeah, she is. She is fantastic. So listeners, if you haven't gone into the back catalogue, then do.
Clearly, I haven't. Sorry.
And finally, my next guest is Dan Davis. He's a former regulatory economist at the Bank of England, an analyst for a number of investment banks, and he's written some fascinating books, including Lying for Money. His latest book is called The Unaccountability Machine: Why Big Systems Make Terrible Decisions. What question would you like to pose to Dan?
What blind spots have led to big money leading to these terrible decisions? Like, what are the blind spots impacting that industry?
Yeah.
You might need to word that with better English than I just came up with, because you can tell I hadn't planned that, but something like that.
Yeah, and I'm sure he'll have a few stories he can
Exactly.
tell
Oh, that's
about
an
that.
easy one. That's an easy one compared to what I was asked.
Well, Kirsten, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope from today's discussion, our listeners will think differently about leadership. I know from reading your two books, I certainly do. And I think that the takeaways, if you question your assumptions, embrace this ambiguity, remain open to learning, you become a more effective leader. Whether you're steering a corporate company, a small team, or just
Yep.
guiding your family by following this practice of blind spotting, you just learn so many different skills. It empowers you to make smarter decisions and it inspire others around you to do the same. So we've mentioned already the blindspotting.com.au survey. Is there any other areas that people should look at if they're interested?
If they just Google my name, KirstenFerguson.com, all eyes, okay, it'll be in the show notes, I'm sure. But just that's my website, and you can find all my books and work there.
Well, you don't need it, but good luck with the new book, Kirsten,
Thank
and
you.
be sure to get in touch when the world tour brings you from Australia to England, because I know you'll be packing your bags soon. So it'd be good
I
to
will
catch you up.
do.
Thanks
Thanks,
for joining
Nick.
me today. Thank you. This podcast has been brought to you in partnership with Awards International. Awards International is dedicated to running successful business awards programs and conferences. Founded in 2008 by Don Hales and Neil Skihel, the company's core mission centers on honoring and celebrating exceptional achievements in customer and employee experience, but also in overall business excellence across diverse sectors. In addition, their aim is to showcase best practices, innovations, and achievements that contribute positively to these areas, ultimately inspiring other organizations to improve their own customer experience, employee engagement strategies, and overall business success. To find out more about Awards International and how to register your interest in their awards programs, check their website www.awardsinternational.com.